Automating parts of your business makes good sense, especially when it comes time to sell it down the track. Hi, my name's Ali Cain. I'm a finance journalist and the host of the Buy That Business podcast. Each episode, we talk to experts about everything you need to know when it comes time to buy or sell a business. Today, my guest is Carl Learson, who's the managing partner and consultant of the CRL Financial Services. Welcome to the podcast, Carl.
Thanks, Ali.
So, Carl, you're an expert when it comes to automating. How did you get to be where you are today?
Oh, well, that's it. Look, it's a bit of a long story, but I had nearly 15 years in business and corporate banking, and both experienced as a user of systems, but also as a banker of numerous customers who had various systems, and got to witness firsthand how some businesses really can automate and integrate really well, including some banks, and some customers just don't get it, and some banks don't get it, and so I really experienced firsthand that contrast. And also benefited from it, as an employee, of course. Later on, my career took a bit of went off on a tangent, and I became the CFO, or the Chief Finance Officer, for one of the largest community service organisations in regional New South Wales, and that organisation was on a significant growth trajectory. We were growing 20-30% per year, year in, year out. And so we started with maybe 200 employees. And I think when I finished with them, we were at 600 employees. We had a fleet of 150 cars, hundreds of computers, and without automation, we would have sunk. The invoices that we saw daily, you just couldn't do if manually. I mean, you could do it manually, but not cost effectively.
Sure.
And so I really learned. I had the mandate to implement systems that were automated and efficient, and that took out repetitive tasks. But it really wasn't until I was actually going through a period of chemotherapy that a friend of mine recognised I was looking for something to do, and he's a business owner in town here, and said, "Look, why don't you pay us a visit and let us know what you can do and what you observe in our business?" And I thought, wow, I really love doing this. This is cool. Really, that was the catalyst to register as a bookkeeper, tax practitioner, and really head off down a path of integration and automation and putting good systems in place for folks. So that's the long version.
So out of adversity comes opportunity, as is often the case.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's been quite exciting, really. So, yeah.
So fast forward, what's your business now?
Look, we've got, my wife and I are both partners in a firm that provides bookkeeping as a sort of a core element. But I think what differentiates us from a lot of bookkeepers is that we're really keen to harness technology, to integrate, to automate systems. I guess that means mostly digitising systems. I like challenges. I really personally don't like repetitive tasks, and so there's it's a passion of mine to get rid of that stuff. We've recently helped a client who has 400 invoices a month, and that's not significant, but for a small business it is.
Yes.
And I couldn't bear the thought of processing those invoices day in, day out, and so we've put in a system, and now they just go through. So that's what we do for people, for businesses, both small and much larger, and we offer the traditional sort of bookkeeping services, payroll, BAS, but especially that background integration and looking for software solutions.
Obviously, as I mentioned in the intro to this podcast, automating parts of your business is so attractive to potential buyers. So if you're starting on that journey, where do you start when it comes to automation?
Every business is so different, and they're at different parts of their journey. I think there's different cultures in organisations, and I guess the motivation for change is sometimes much greater than in other businesses. So I guess it depends. But, like some businesses will need a mass marketing solution. They just want to really punch out a heap of emails and SMSs. Somebody else has 400 invoices that they need to process. And so really we sit down together with business owners and sort of, to use a cliche, key stakeholders, I suppose,
Sure.
and really just try and identify, what it is that they really are trying to achieve and where the greatest return on their investment will be. So it's really about sitting down, doing some analysis, and then working out.
So it's horses for courses, really, depending
Yeah.
on what the business is and which stage it's at.
For sure. Yep.
Is there common low-hanging fruit that you see across different businesses? For example, things like marketing and invoicing are those two things that a lot of businesses could benefit from if they did decide to go down the automation path.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, look, I did think about what is, in anticipation of this interview, I did think about what is the low-hanging fruit. And I've just made a little list, so I'll glance over to my screen over here just so I don't forget anything. But I did think about workflow and collaboration. So workflow, like basic forms, having a form, particularly when you're recruiting staff, for instance, you start to hire, then you go to an interview, then you compile the information. Like there's all these steps, and they get repeated every client, every employee that you go to employ, and then you issue a phone and a laptop, and then you set them up with a computer access. And there's all these things that just are so repetitive, and they are things that we can automate. So there's workflow and collaboration, and that's really any form. Approval for leave or approval to attend a course. All those things. They're so simple, really.
Yes.
I think payroll and timesheets and leave management is a biggie, and most organisations can go there.
Yes.
Whether you're small or large, doesn't matter.
Sure.
Accounts payable processes, and so there's a real opportunity now with our optical character recognition software that can read invoices.
Yes.
Is fantastic, and that can really automate that. There's employee expense reimbursement. So if you've got an organisation with a lot of staff that are perhaps on the road or do a bit of travel and incur expenditure, that's really organisational expenditure, that can be automated and simplified. And likewise can sort of that project and job costing. So you can have a system where you can quote, a client can accept a quote, the quote can turn into a job management system and then become an invoice later on without having to re-enter all that data.
Sure.
And I love that myself. I think that's great. And then, of course, the mass marketing where you can have systems, sort of client management systems that can respond to emails, send emails, really integrate with your website. So yeah, there's probably more, but they're the ones that we would be involved with mostly.
It's great to see someone that has so much passion for what they do. When you look at the different jobs that you've done over time, are there some things that are harder to automate than others that are, quite difficult?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, we've experienced one personally in our own business recently. The more difficult the decision-making process gets, the more difficult the automation gets. So I guess the more logic you require, I think that's the word. The more difficult it gets. So it's an inverse proportion to the repetition and So if something's really repetitive, it's simple to automate. And I mean, you have to look at the old production line in the Henry Ford. Worked that out pretty early.
Yeah.
If you make a standard car, it's easy to punch them out at an affordable price. But if you go down the Rolls-Royce method and customize every model, it just becomes much more difficult to automate. Now, there's components of that, of course, you can automate the ordering and paying and all the rest, but production becomes more difficult. So,
What about for more established businesses? I imagine if you're starting out, you can more easily go on the automation journey because you're just establishing processes. But if your processes are well established and embedded in the business, what's the best way to approach automation?
Ironically, sometimes the more established businesses can automate more simply because they do have the established processes. Um, so when we get a brand new business that's coming to us, or like a startup, I suppose, they haven't got the systems in place already necessarily, unless somebody's really thought about it well.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're trying to automate, we're actually designing a system and then trying to automate that system. Now, sometimes that's it, but that presents opportunity to get it right. But for instance, the organisation that I worked for as a CFO, because we had such well-established policies, albeit that they were changing because of the growth, when we were trying to automate, we're just automating an existing process. And so we take a design and then say, okay, how do we get rid of those tasks? So look, both have opportunity, but I think for big businesses, there is an opportunity there to say, okay, we've got something that works. Now let's just replicate rather, and just take out those steps. So,
what's the process? Is it about, articulating this repetitive steps, then codifying that somehow and using software to make it simpler? What is the process of automation?
I think it does take some analysis. So it really requires some understanding of the process. And sometimes, even as a third party coming in, I see it. And other times I don't see it at all. It's really the person or the people that are involved in the process. And they say, well, we did this yesterday and now we're doing it again, and I may not see that just coming in for an hour and having a look. And so you really need people to identify that. And sometimes it's not, for instance, if it was the HR, sometimes it's not the HR manager that identifies it, it's the employees that go, wow, that system's broken. So
yeah.
So once we understand that there's a system, we map out the system, perhaps using a flow chart, and then identify which steps we can automate, which often requires a bit of some research about relevant software that integrates with their existing systems. Sometimes it means looking for a complete new system, and that's extreme, and we try to avoid that. Yeah, so it's looking for those repetitive steps and seeing if we can remove those with software, with technology.
Are there some things that can't be codified and automated? Any bespoke practices or systems that change every time they're performed?
Where where businesses are selling something and the product they're selling is quite, like you say, bespoke, is quite customised, a bit like the Rolls Royce again. Sometimes that process is difficult it really requires some sort of manual entry. Now you can systemize that, of course, but it's hard to just sort of make it flow without somebody really driving that process.
But most things can be automated if you put the time and effort into understanding the process and setting it down and putting the procedures in place.
Yeah, look, I think so. I'm not a programmer. I'm not good with code. In fact, I'm terrible with code. But you speak to some folk who are in that space, and I guess they're as passionate about making it work as I am to see it work. And so, but you've got to weigh up your return on your investment. You can do a lot of things, but you just won't get the return.
What are the main benefits that businesses accrue when they do go down the automation path?
I think there's probably a couple of layers there. I think the first one is probably a better experience for staff. So now sometimes you have to sell it to your staff because staff often have a concern that they're going to be put out of a job or they'll reduce hours or whatever. But usually when you take the repetitive tasks away, you give them an opportunity to actually do something else. So it's freeing up a resource and perhaps utilising that resource somewhere else and perhaps better leveraging the skills of the employee.
Yeah.
So I think for the employee, there's a better experience. Also for management, so they perhaps get better information or more readily, particularly in the, perhaps when you're automating the generation of management reports and documents. Perhaps for the board, they get a better overview, and maybe for clients and staff, clients and suppliers as well. Again, depending on what process you're automating, if it's around purchase orders and the delivery of product, then certainly for your supplier, that'll be a much happier experience and less misunderstanding, I suppose.
Yeah, and less uncertainty.
Yeah, less uncertainty. Yep.
Which is great for business. But you raise an important point. How do you bring staff along the journey when they may have fears that they will be put out of a job? What's that sort of human touch element to it?
Yeah, sure. Look, I actually thought one of the things we're really mindful of when we look at automation is really about change management and making sure that we've got staff or stakeholders actually on board. I mean, the classic is trying to implement an online and digitised board reporting system where most of the board members are not really interested in a laptop and
right.
iPad, so you really got to know who the users will be and make sure that they're on board. So it's really about selling the benefit, and I guess being sure that there is a benefit for those stakeholders.
That's right.
So, and look, I think it's easy to overlook that. So it's easy for me to race in and say, "Oh, you can simplify that," where not everybody wants it. So then you may have to look at cost benefit, make sure that there's a reason to do it before you implement. Otherwise, it will not be, you just won't get the engagement.
No, that's right. Are you finding that any of your clients are introducing more advanced tools like AI or machine learning in their automation processes?
AI is an interesting topic that I guess I'm still even getting my head around. But we've never had any client come to us and actually say we want to implement AI, but the solution they're asking for is underpinned by AI. And so it's quite interesting. So, so for instance, people are looking at call center, like automated call centers. And so those automated responses when you pick up the phone and it says, please say in a few words what it is you're looking for, it's AI. And so they're asking for a solution, but it's AI that's underlining it. Likewise with, automated accounts payable processes. A lot of that is AI driven. Yeah, so even small businesses are taking on AI, but not consciously or not even deliberately. It's the benefit that comes out of that technology that perhaps we're all benefiting from.
Wow, I guess it seems like we're at a point where it's assumed that AI is inbuilt into most of the tools we use, which is an interesting place to get to, I suppose, but a natural place for us to get to as well. Yeah.
Well, even yesterday, I was reading about some articles about AI. I'm just thinking, well, we're already adopting it. It's not. Yeah. We're just not aware of it. So,
it's here. It's here today. Yeah. What about mistakes that you see people make when they automate their business? Are there any common mistakes that you can help our viewers avoid in the future?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm probably starting to blush at this point because I'm mindful that I made the biggest mistake early in my career, and I've talked about it before. I took a system that worked, and I was trying to automate it. But as I was going, I thought, boy, it'd be cool if we could do that. It'd be cool if we could do that. And I took a system that worked, and I created a system that didn't, and it cost me an absolute bomb. Or it cost my employer. Yeah, so take what works, automate it, and then develop it later is my key message. So that's one. So don't try and fix what isn't broke. Work with what you've got. Scope creep. I mean, that speaks for itself. But and obviously the cultural acceptance. Make sure it fits with the organisation.
Yeah, that's
make sure you've got people on board. Get the change management piece right. So they'd be the three sort of key areas that we're really mindful of.
Interesting.
And quick to remind people about
That's great. So Carl, we're coming to the end of the podcast, but I just want to ask you one last question, which is, what is your top tip when it comes to automating business practices?
I was trying to think of some cool one-liner, but what we came up with and what we say to each other sometimes is, or to our staff, is recognise and remove repetition to release resources. So a lot of R's there, but it's remove repetition to release resources, and I think that's what it's about. It creates opportunity, and you can put your effort and your passion and your motivations elsewhere to grow business, really. So.
Yes, that's exactly right. It gives you an opportunity to focus on what you do best and extend your business and leave the grunt work behind, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. So Carl, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today. We love to hear from viewers about any ideas or comments they have, and all our details are at the bottom of the podcast. So please get in touch if you'd like to. That's all we have time for today. So thanks so much, Carl, and we'll see you next time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Alan.